I'm Greg Goodale. I'm a professor in the Communication Studies Department, and I study political communication, particularly rhetoric, and how politicians sound. I'm very interested in how citizenship works and why people vote the way they do and how they participate in politics. And so that led me to start studying how politicians sound. How is it that they persuade and manipulate audiences? And of course, as a rhetorician, I study how they use words to do that. But I started to figure out that some of them are really sophisticated about how they use their voice to manipulate and persuade. What I do is I study the difference between what we see on a page and how the candidates actually sound, or how politicians actually sound. There are a number of candidates who are running for office right now whose voices sound like they've been modified in a particular kind of way. And so Mitt Romney, who has a lot of money, you know he's hired speech trainers, he sounds sometimes like the Fonz, that very cool character from the 1970s. And that's a good image, that's a good sound for him. Rick Santorum sometimes sounds like Brian Williams, which is a genius accent for Rick Santorum. Rick Santorum is very far to the right of the political spectrum, but when you sound like the guy who's reading the news and is a very moderate person on NBC, you sound like you're more moderate than your positions actually are. Ron Paul sounds like the uncle in Seinfeld. You don't want to sound like that. And a lot of people like him because he doesn't sound presidential. Americans are actually persuaded by the sound of presidential voices. If you go back over the last few presidential elections, you'll notice that the better speaker, and not in terms of eloquence, not in terms of the words that were chosen, but in terms of the way they sounded, always won the presidency. So George Bush and Al Gore were pretty close, but Bush is a more comforting and a more familiar voice. Only in the past couple of years, scholars have really begun to pay attention to sound, because we have been paying attention to images for 40 years. Now we're really starting to think about how is it that sound is causing people's behaviors to change, and we're discovering that it changes our behaviors in a lot of ways.